discussion is going to be basically an invitation from NOAA for co-creation or co-development, which is a great opportunity. They have basically would like to define those hazards, and they need the input from the engineering community. And this input has already started through the industry proving ground. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
It's all yours.
All right. I will introduce myself. And let me know if this dies. All right, so my name is Russell Vose. I am the Chief of the Monitoring and Assessments branch at the National Centers for Environmental Information. So I see Joe P. quite a bit. In some ways, I'm uniquely suited to give this talk, and in some ways, I'm really poorly suited to give this talk. I'm probably a good fit because I do a lot of climate science, or I have over my 24 years in NOAA, another 5 years as a state climatologist in Arizona, 5 years in a national laboratory. So I've got a lot of depth here. And it's actually been really interesting to hear talk about the 3 degrees Celsius threshold for planning purposes, because when I got into this business, and for a good chunk of my career, it's been more about the debate. Is there a change, fighting off those who are arguing about whether climate is stationary or not? So to hear a group saying, we're planning for 3 degrees, we've set a simple number to like operate on, is really fascinating and I think encouraging. Yes. So I'm here to talk about the industry proving ground. Dan Walker put me on this. And before I get going, I want to recognize a few key players here this morning. The first and foremost is this guy named Mike Brewer, who is not here, but he's actually the guy who's been running point on industry proving ground. He's got a day job. He's another branch chief, just like I am. He's heading up our regional climate services program, but he's also been heading up this program for about the past year. He doesn't seem tired yet. I'm not sure how he's pulled it off, but he's the one who really deserves the credit for what I'm going to be talking about here between now and lunch. 2 other characters who deserve some attention are, of course, this guy named Deke Arndt, who's the director of NCEI, and Joe, who you've heard from already. There are a few folks here who are supporting the engagement activities. There's Adriana, Maggie, Morgan, and Noah, N-O-A-H, not N-O-A-A, but very appropriate. They're taking copious notes, so when someone says 25 kilometers, they're writing it down, they love it. But they're going to be the ones who are charged with capturing a lot of the goodness that comes out during discussions today. So really appreciate what they're doing or what they're going to be doing here the next 2 days. And then, of course, the people who are responsible for this workshop, Bilal, thank you, Dan, thank you, Megan, thank you. It's good to be here. All right, so this is the most interesting slide in the talk, and it's all downhill from here. Back in January, NOAA put out this press release saying Biden-Harris administration invests $85 million for industry proving grounds program to strengthen climate resilience through investing in America agenda. Again, you remember me saying I've been in government for 3 decades and I have never seen anything like this. It just doesn't happen. I was talking about being a skeptic. I was like, this isn't going to happen. They're talking about this. This never happens. Well, crap, it happened. Now we have to do something about it. It's a great problem to have. They kicked it off in a fun way. They had Deputy Secretary Graves come down to Asheville along with Director of NOAA, Rick Spinrad, and Director of NESDIS, Steve Oles. And a number of you who are in the room were down there as well for the kickoff. Good to see some of you again. Great occasion. Each one of them sort of set the tone, the importance of climate resilience. Got to know them personally, like Deputy Secretary Graves talked about how he hasn't yet watched Ted Lasso, and he thought that was an important detail to share. It is important, Dan. So, but the point was people were excited. There was a lot of excitement about this program because, as Bilal said earlier, this is out to actually change the way things get done. This really stands the chance of having a big impact going forward. So I get to talk about some of that today, and that's the fun part. So a lot of this stuff is going to be sort of conceptual, principles we want to follow, ways we want to approach work, because the thing is just getting started. But there are some practical things as well. Like the program itself has 4 general components. The biggest of which is in box A, improved delivery of NOAA climate data and services to American industries and enhanced broad use of NOAA trusted and authoritative information. This basically means build more data sets, products, and services. which actually I am a good fit for because I managed that work at NCEI for a long time as well. The number in the lower right-hand corner of each one of these boxes is like the rough proportion of that 85 million that's going into that effort. So 67 million-ish that's going in to the building of stuff. It's the biggest part. This is the effort that's being led through NCEI. There are a few others worth noting though. OAR has got some work engaging on technology across NOAA and commerce. If you want to hear more about that, I'll just let you ask Ben directly. He could speak to that. The NOAA chief scientist, Sarah Kapnick, is leading some work on risk modeling to support decision-making. And then there's a group called PRSSO, I believe that's Performance Risk and Social Science Office in NOAA, that's doing some work to evaluate basically how well the work is done here. Do surveys from the get-go, do surveys as time goes on to try to catch a snapshot of like, are we improving the way we're delivering data sets and products and services to user communities? So 4 major components, the biggest one being the stuff you're probably most interested in here. We're anticipating or hoping for a number of outcomes. Again, data, products, and services on the left. That's going to be the biggest thing. Things that hopefully lead to improved decision-making and resilience. We're hoping to support sector literacy and capacity. Ideally, sectors are more informed on the value of NOAA data and how to use it. Some of that's probably self-evident here. That's partly why you're here, but this is where the program is headed. Renewing relationships, trying to build momentum for innovation and advocacy, and then equity offshoots and investments, ensure other sectors benefit from the investments that we're putting into this industry proving ground. There's a few overarching principles we're trying to follow here, like implement the activities of the vision for the climate-ready nation in mind. That's something that Dr. Spinrad spoke about when he was here a year ago in February, including mechanisms for serving communities that are traditionally underserved. We want to improve stakeholder uptake of NOAA information in key sectors to earn the advocacy of those stakeholders. We want to deliver quick and impactful wins, but at the same time, durable wins throughout. What this bullet basically means here is it's not $85 million to spend a few years doing cool research and then at the end suddenly rush to get things out. No, we want to, from day one, be providing things that are relevant to others who need to make decisions. Implements radically improved usability of public-facing information. Sometimes our stuff can be a little more challenging to get than you might choose, and we want to make some serious progress on that front. And then sort of inside the house, reduce sustainment costs and the operations and maintenance tail for a post-project world. So we want to plan to make these things last long after the money has disappeared. That's the part that makes some people nervous when you have a budget that goes flat after that. And any program like this, it's this big, you have to have a bit of a roadmap, and this cartoon is trying to give you a sense for how that's going to play out. The least interesting box is the one at the top, something called program management. If we're doing our job well, you never know anything about that. That box has pretty much been by Mike Brewer at this point. There are a couple of people coming on board to help him out. Continuous engagement throughout the life of the program. There have been a couple of speakers who have alluded to this. I think Joe mentioned something about code development. You'll hear me talk more about that several other moments in this presentation, but that's the whole notion that we want to like, well, what do you need? Okay, let's refine the requirement to something that actually is meaningful, confirm that that's meaningful, and then actually go about the process of developing something. And then during the development process, making sure that we're on the right track. And again, you'll hear that speech again, but I want to enforce that point because that's important. The bottom two parts of the cartoon are sort of a ramp up and level off and a ramp up or ramp down a little bit. Start at the bottom, data and infrastructure. I think Shirley mentioned something about needs. We need data. It was kind of fun to hear you say that. It's like, sure, we want Atlas 14 and 15, and that's great, but we just need more precipitation data. We need the temperature data. So part of our effort initially is going to be making sure that like we improve access to some of what we've already had for a long time. And access may mean, here's where you get it, or access might mean, here's the format that's more appropriate for what you need, or it can mean many other things as well. But that's going to be a little bit more of an emphasis from the get-go, and then ramp up the operational product and service development as time goes on. By the way, this project duration, roughly federal fiscal year 23, so it started a little while ago, winding down in 26, and to a point that Dan made earlier today, You know, the $85 million is the appropriation. We're hoping that we are able to play out with the entire appropriation, but there is a change coming this fall, and there are be some aspects of the program that get impacted by that. But a lot of what we have is already in the pipeline. A lot of like the contract commitments, they're already made and fully funded. Our Cooperative Institute commitments are made and fully funded. So we stand a good chance of getting most of it through the system. Speaking of partners, this is another fun part of the talk for me. This is not something that the federal side, meaning NOAA employees at NCEI and a few other places, mostly do. We mostly won't do. Most of the work is actually going to be done by our partners. And the biggest partner probably so far is a company called Riverside Technology. They won the contract to do this work. They hit the ground running. It's crazy. By the way, Dan Wonder just looked at me. You don't have to like raise your hand or anything, but Dan Wonder's leading the effort on Riverside's behalf. They've been crazy. I mean, you've hired like 50 people already or something like that, really fast. I've never seen anything like this. So they're taking it very seriously. And that makes this work a lot of fun. I mean, we had a kickoff meeting 2 weeks ago in Asheville, brought most of the new employees in, and it was a great experience. Another big partner is our Cooperative Institute in Asheville, the Cooperative Institute for Satellite Earth System Studies at North Carolina State University. If there is more researchy stuff to do, they're probably the ones who are going to be doing it. But there's some other players like the NOAA Regional Climate Centers. There are a couple of those who will be contributing in this space. The state climatologists will have a role. The NOAA Center for Artificial Intelligence will play its little commando role in helping on that obvious front. I already mentioned OAR has some work going on, the Weather Service through Atlas 14, 15, and Department of Defense, but I won't emphasize the ones at the bottom there. I'm mainly sticking to the stuff that's being done headed by Asheville today. All right, so $85 million sounds like a lot of money, at least to a climate scientist. Maybe not an engineer, I don't know. You build things that cost that much and a lot more. But we have to draw a line somewhere. So the focus is going to be on 3 sectors: finance and reinsurance, retail, and then of course, architecture and engineering. You already figured that out, I'm sure. For each one of these sectors, there's going to be a single point of contact, primary point of contact. I'm that point of contact for architecture and engineering. So I wouldn't say if you need something, but I'm a good place to start with me. For finance and reinsurance, just if you're curious, the point of contact there is a guy named Adam Smith, who some of you may have run across if you watched the Weather Channel and heard about billion-dollar disasters. Adam is the keeper of the billion-dollar weather disasters product. He's probably talking to Jim Cantori again next week if I know Adam. So he's the lead for that sector. And then retail is Jenny Disson, who's an employee of our Cooperative Institute in Nashville. But again, each sector has one point of contact. Our job is to establish trust. We'll try, we'll smile, we'll listen politely. No, we really don't. We want to do good. But it's also to set expectations, not just we can't do it all, but it's like, you know, maybe some things aren't possible. Like there were some data asks that might have been like, wow, that's awfully fine time resolution, but you want it for lots of places. That may not be something that's doable unless you're willing to use like the output of a model, like a reanalysis or something like to do that. But that's part of our job, set expectations, and then try to ensure that we share information. Like there may be some requirements that come in that's like, we get, that's not our thing. That's not our wheelhouse. Get them to the part of NOAA that is, and hopefully they can do something with it, or at least they've heard about it. All right, a few common themes here that we've actually heard through previous engagement activities, and some of these go back several years now. Provide information and products in an easy-to-use format. In other words, don't make me be a climate scientist. I'm an engineer. Give me a number. Don't make me be a climate scientist. Climate scientists are great. I like them. I know some personally, but we understand, you know. Improve access by establishing a central repository for prioritized information. Don't give me the kitchen sink. I concede that our website is a bit of a kitchen sink. You can get a lot of stuff there, but you've got to do a lot of digging to find it. And it can be confusing. And part of this effort will hopefully address some of that problem. And then this phrase, co-development again, co-develop new information to help with decision-making. Don't treat me like a loading dock. There's often been this historical model. I know it exists in NOAA, probably some other places where oh, we heard you want this, we'll make this. And then we just kind of put it out on our website, or the old days, an FTP site. There you go, we did it. And oh, I don't know how to use this. So we don't want to be a loading dock. We want to be a partner. Few three work streams that things are going to proceed on here. Website developments, data ingest and formatting, and product development. And by the way, there is some redundancy built into this talk, and that's intentional because I partly realized that I'm standing between you and lunch, and blood sugar may be an issue at this stage, but it's important, I think, because we want you guys to remember certain things like website development. We want to create sector-specific portals to improve the user experience. We want to develop tutorials for using data products as tools and services. We basically make it easier to understand the information. Workstream 2, data ingest and formats. We want to try to understand industry challenges related to access and usability. So something here comes up in this context is the hazards tool. My sense is that the hazards tool is used by a community pretty broadly. That's maybe the first place people go if you're an engineer. Well, if we can do something to make sure the products and services that are developed here work their way into that tool, that probably facilitates the uptake of the information pretty rapidly. I'm not saying everything's a good fit there, but it's something we ought to be talking about. And then otherwise translate data sets into relevant formats and make them cloud and AI ready. And then lastly, product development itself, develop products and services that support decision-making, and then share feedback on the products and services throughout the development process. Again, not be a loading dock. This is sort of a defensive slide here. It's just this notion that like, some people may get the feeling that, like, oh, you're talking to us now because there's this industry proving ground. But we have actually tried over the course of, say, the past 20 years to engage a lot of different sectors. And there has been some engagement. I'm talking about, say, even pre-2022 with the engineering sector on certain things. Like in the 2000s, we actually, as a result of some of that engagement, did some footer depth normals from the air freezing index. There have been a number of other engagements over the years with, say, the American Society for Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning. We produced a product in the 2010s related to climate data for frost-protected shallow foundations. You know, so there has been some work we've tried to do with these communities. And if I may say on the aside, it was the talk that was virtual. There was some mention about like subsurface sorts of things. This is a trick I learned back as a state climatologist. The Utah state climatologist told me this. You ever really want to know what the freezing depth is locally? You know who you should talk to? The people who dig graves. Because they're at it all year long and they know how much it's frozen and how far down. Kind of morbid, but it's true. They're a great source of information. We won't make you do that. All right, so the American Society for Civil Engineers is the proxy sector for architecture and engineering in general. We will talk to other groups, but this is the primary group we intend to focus on. For obvious reasons, it's the oldest civil engineering society. You all know that. There's 150,000 of you. You already know that. We heard from the specific institutes right before I spoke. Structural engineering, environment and water resources, coast, oceans, ports and rivers. There was some stuff in there, Norma, Jean, that I didn't expect to hear, and that would probably mean we need to talk to our sister division, coast, oceans, and geophysics, because there may be some things that I hadn't even thought about that'll suit your needs. Of course, lots of standards are sensitive to climate. We have this memorandum of understanding focused on climate resilience. I think that was kicked off a year ago, February. Again, focus on observations, projections, and information. And by the way, that was pretty well received. So we're now working on a new MOU with the Reinsurance Association of America. So the idea is like, well, this made sense. It seems to be well received. Let's expand this to another group. And then there's this task force that Dan pesters us with every month or so with meetings, and by and large is, you know, pick on them, but it's hard to sustain an effort like that. But that's important. It's not always glamorous, but, you know, perpetually going after people does, you know, get the message across. And of course, part of the focus of that is climate in the future. And this is where I have to be a climate scientist for a couple of minutes, because we've been talking about the importance of resiliency and changes and such, but we haven't actually talked about the changes themselves. So I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes saying, well, you know, reinforcing this notion that there are some substantial projected changes in temperature extremes. That's what these three maps are talking about here. And by the way, these assume 2 degrees Celsius of global warming, not 3. I just pulled them directly from the 5th National Climate Assessment. Message there partly is, I think ASCE is being particularly conservative. They're engineering right now for an even harsher world than NCA 5 was using as their figure basis. Obviously, NCA 5 looked at 2 and 3 degrees of warming, but you've set a high bar. But yeah, the figure on the left, number of hot days, projected changes in the number of hot days. The areas that are intense reds in the southeast and southern United States, you're looking at in excess of some places of more than a month of additional days above 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, plan for that. Cold days, that's the figure in the middle. The Pacific Northwest and the Northeast United States, again, some of those places are looking at like a month or more with fewer days below freezing. There are engineering implications to that, quite obviously. Figure on the right is the number of warm nights. Again, it's the southeastern United States. They're going to see far fewer days that drop below 70 degrees at night. That has substantial human health implications. So that's temperature, projected changes in rainfall extremes. 3 maps here. Each one's a different metric of change. I don't actually need to really go into the details because the maps are all basically blue, except for small parts of the plains in the Southwest. Basically, there are projected changes in precipitation extremes or heavy precipitation everywhere, particularly Alaska. The message here is simple. Warmer air holds more moisture, which means you have a better shot at having an extreme event. But these are on the orders of 10 to 20% or more, depending upon the metric you're using. And then finally, here I channel my inner Billy Sweet, who better be listening on the call right now. Changes in sea level. There are 2 figures here. One's for intermediate scenario in 2050, figure on the right's for same scenario in 2100. By 2050, you see most of the US coastlines have increases of anywhere from 1 to 2 feet the sea level. And by 2100, they're on the order of several feet. Yeah, that's expensive. That's expensive. And the thing about sea level is the uncertainty is really a devil to get at. There's a wide range in the uncertainty estimates, and the ones on the extreme side, like the big changes, I don't know how you plan for that, So, because you're starting to deal with things like how much of the ice sheets will melt farther out in time, and that's very difficult to model. So, this is a tough problem. But the point is, big projected changes that we're all grappling with. But getting back to the main storyline, we've had a lot of good interactions with ASCE over the past couple of years. The 2 workshops that I believe Dan was responsible for leading on temperature and rainfall, winds and coastal hazards, and a lot of people in this room participated in those. The Summit on Climate Ready Infrastructure last February, 2023, the Inspire Conference. A lot of opportunities to gather requirements. So the idea here going forward is that hopefully IPG, or Industry Proving Ground, provides resources to follow up on what we've learned through that engagement process. It's been tough. We maybe wanted to do some of it, but it's hard, in a level resource world. This helps to move that forward. So brief thoughts on aligning the program with the roadmap. Well, a few different stages here, but again, identifying standards that require revision or new standards that require articulation. I was fascinated by your talk, Jennifer, on how that process works with the standards and the manuals of practice. There's been good progress here, though. Obviously, a lot of thought's gone into that. But the real work that lies ahead is, again, this co-developing the actionable intelligence, meaning the specific data sets and products and services that support the standards and the manuals of practice, with the things at the bottom of the pyramid. And again, scant progress here, aside from identifying some key near-term opportunities. And then finally, we do all that right, though, you can facilitate revisions to ASCE guidance that may take 10 years or 20 years. Maybe that's why you pick 3 degrees Celsius global warming, because it'll take that long. I don't know. But maybe at that stage, make some real progress. So we've received a number of data and infrastructure requests already as a result of previous engagement activities. These are pretty simple. Web portals that are sector specific. So we're planning on something that will be aimed at the architecture and engineering community. Place to go. You want something, go there first. Finance and reinsurance will get its own, retail will get its own. And then there's been a lot of asks for reliability, which is not to imply that our information isn't reliable, but they said there are some things you could probably do to help sustain things in the long term. Like we know some of your code bases are a little tired. Like the code base that manages the data for the automated surface observing stream system on our end. This is the first order weather stations, think of airports. The code on our end is in some cases several decades old, and we still pull the data off of modems. You know, that should be refactored to provide stability going forward. They're safe in the meantime, by the way. We're not going to lose anything. Talk about we're doing work more in a cloud context, like containerizing our operations. And if you can get them running in the cloud, then you're a lot more insulated from things that might happen on, say, on-prem resources where we work now. Things happen once in a while. You get them in the cloud, that's a lot less of a risk to deal with. And then things like data transformations, which you already alluded to, putting things in formats that are more like what would be useful to you. This slide is just to make the point that we've received a number of product requests from engineering already from previous engagements, and I wanted to give you a sense for some of those that we've heard, and some of which I hope will be refined over the next day or so. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about precipitation frequency analyses, Atlas 14 and 15. Obviously, the Weather Service has that in process already. We have some work that's sliding sort of in between, working on projected changes in heavy precipitation that may like bridge the gap between when the Weather Service can actually get out the official version of their projected changes. There's been asks for wind climatologies. So the Western Regional Climate Center is already working on that. There's been asks for wind-driven rain climatology. That's being worked by the Northeast Regional Climate Center right now. A few others that are a little more eccentric, but address some of, I think, what Don mentioned, like snow and freezing rain events. We don't know exactly what that means yet. That's partly what we need to talk more about today, so we know what to develop. But inland tropical cyclone rainfall has been something that's come up multiple occasions, or pluvial and fluvial flooding events. And then some more generic products that have existed in the past, like typical meteorological year. That's a product that the National Renewable Energy Laboratory made at one point, but I don't think they've updated it since the late 2000s. And there's been an ask in NOAA to stand up a product to that effect. Engineering weather data. That's something that used to exist, and the Air Force has taken the lead on that. We're going to put out a new version of that with them sometime soon. And of course, lots of interest in subdaily extremes. So these are examples of things that have various levels of specificity to them. But the point is trying to acknowledge that we've heard some things already, and we want to run with them with a little more guidance, if you will. There's a lot more that can be mined from here. This is the workshop summary from 2 years ago. There's some great nuggets in here. And if you haven't had the chance to look at it, I would suggest you do it, because a lot of people worked really hard to spin these reports up. Like Joe Barsugli, who actually, it's nice to finally see you in person after several years of meetings online. And, you know, Dan and Bilal and Ben, you know, but there's a lot of good stuff that was captured in here, and actually can serve as a bit of a model going forward for how to do this sort of thing. I won't go into great detail on what was captured there, but this is an example of the sort of way the information was presented. So I'm noting it as some near-term opportunities, if you will, where the columns are sort of climatic elements like temperature, precipitation, wind, and coastal hazards. And the rows are, I don't know what you'd actually call them, but they're specifically engineering practice, standards, products, and opportunity. So I'll pick an example or two. You know, temperature. Well, there's some engineering practices that are concerned with temperature because temperature is a design variable related to soils. And there are some ASCE standards that like use the air freezing index. You know, so there's some NOAA products that can support that, like historical station data and some models. And a near-term opportunity might be doing more localized projections for, say, an air freezing index for planning purposes. That's one example of how this information could be conceptualized, but you could do the same thing with other things like precipitation, which I think people have a pretty good feel for already, or the coastal hazards. You know, the big punchline there being we need projections guidance for extreme water levels, or if you combine extreme water levels with wave heights, which is, that's different work, that's difficult to do. It could be very helpful. One other thing before I wrap up here, I think that the Climate Program Office is working on a press release for this sort of thing right now because it's supporting or helping support two efforts in what you might call the piloting climate projection services space. Now, this isn't to imply that NOAA hasn't done any projection work before. It's done a ton of work before, but CPO thought it would be a good idea to get some very specific projects spun up that are focused on, well, doing two things. First of all, stylistically wise, developing things in this, using this service delivery model, which I alluded to earlier, where what you do is you gather requirements from communities, you try to translate those requirements into more specific design standards, meaning product design standards. You build it in a collaborative fashion. Like I don't just say, Dan, you said you wanted this, so I'll come back in 3 months and give you this. It's like, we start the process, we check in, this is where we're going, we're on the right track. Then we deliver it. And then after we deliver it, we do some evaluation process to see, well, was it what you needed? Did it help you make better decisions? What happened to it? So that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect is to focus on a few different societal challenge areas like extreme temperatures, heavy precipitation, drought extremes, and then coastal hazards. So there's two different projects going on here. One is led by me at NCEI, and the other is led by Ben Kurtman at the University of Miami. Dan Barry, who's the head of the program that was pushing these things out, sort of called our projects the yin and yang of each other, because like mine was much more focused on like users and getting products out, and Ben's was much more focused on like, there's some really cool modeling stuff and AI work that we could do that would help drive down the uncertainty with the model projections, and you put the two together and, you know, we're likely to like really do a service for the community. But this is something that's just starting up now, has a lifespan that's roughly the same as the industry proving ground itself. And I think this is the last one before my summary slide is, you know, when we started this out, we thought a little bit about, well, how would we measure success in the end? How would you say that the program has like really worked well in the event that something like this ever comes up again? These are all generic, but they're important. One is simply the adoption of NOAA data, products, and services information. Can we somehow quantify that people are now using information that they didn't have before? Another is specific testimonials of the value of the same. Like, oh yes, you made this for us. And because you made this for us, I was able to make this decision, and this decision, you know, had this effect. Those go a long way. And then last, demonstrable improvements in cost or reliability or performance. These are all things that we want to try to capture during the life of the program to help measure the impact that it's had. And I think that's where I stop talking about the program and say, hey, just remember, this is $85 million. It's going to you, but it's going to go fast. I'm not saying act now. The vision is basically climate smart industry. How is deliver data sets, products, services that support resiliency? That's what we're going to do. 3 sectors we're focusing on, including yours truly. And we look forward to serving you. And that's basically my message, and happy to take any questions, or Joe can take questions. Norgine.
So quick question for you, Russ. At COPRI in Waterways, we just stood up a group that's focusing on the use of artificial intelligence in the practice of engineering. The lead there is Bill Katzenmeyer and his colleague Dennis Lambert, and those folks are online.
Okay.
And I want to connect them to whoever you would suggest, because I noticed on one of your slides that you have a group that that's what they do in the proving grounds is the use of artificial intelligence. And so perhaps that might help in that the future that they envision, which is possibly auto dumping of data into their modeling and things like that.
I'd say just start with me, and I will probably hand it off to somebody else, but keep it simple for you. But yes, that was exactly the kind of thing we had in mind. We knew there would be communities out there who were like, we're going this direction. Please listen to what we need to help us do that. Oh, I guess I'm taking it. Dan.
Thanks, Russ. Two things. One is you actually answered my first question, which was you had a list of like products that are already in process that you've divined from different discussions with different communities you want to work on. then you discussed a process by which, those could be co-developed. So my question for you is the industry proving ground expecting ASCE to evaluate some of the products that are already in the pipeline? Is that a role that you see us playing? And then I've got a follow-up question, depending on your answer.
I'm going to channel my inner Mike Brewer now and say yes. But I don't think we have had like a case study where we've done that yet. So it'll probably be a little like learn as we do, but I think that's the point. I mean, if we play our cards right here, one of the things that happens from a selfishly NOAA perspective is we have a new way of doing business long after this program is gone. We just have this more standard practice of engaging with people and when we do new things. Second question.
Yeah, well, the second question, because of the way you answered it, is actually directed at the panel, which included Don and Norma Jean, Shirley, and Sissy. You're either past presidents or current presidents. We're looking at a process that's going to extend further. Are the institutes beginning to have a discussion about how we can help NOAA evaluate some of the products that are already in line? In other words, are we having discussions internally about how to organize ourselves to really meet NOAA's needs for feedback? And I don't necessarily expect an answer. It's more of that's something we want to get to by the end of the day tomorrow.
I think that's a good point. We would just have to pick one to start with.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. Quickly, on the sub-daily extremes, I saw that unfortunately it was last on your list. But I think it's very important for this reason. There's a lot of suspicion that sub-daily extremes are intensifying, and trying to understand the temperature scaling those. We find that the NOAA data is hard to come by at sub-daily.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you're going to prioritize in your industry proving ground program, making sub-daily rainfall available for research like that.
So that's a really good question. The sub-daily extremes bullet is like always resonates, but it always feels very general to me. It's a catch-all. We're acknowledging sub-daily extremes, but I don't know what that means. They were sometimes challenged by a lack of observations, but we do have some sub-daily precipitation information. Like we have a data set there that is hourly observations and then one that does 15 minutes. There are some networks that do even finer resolution for that, but they're less dense spatially. But in terms of projected changes, the project that I'm leading up with projection services, one of my co-PIs, Ken Kunkel, basically wrote the section up on projected changes in heavy precipitation, and he specifically wanted to address the sub-daily extremes thing. And he specifically actually talks about the scaling factor. So does it follow Clausius-Clapeyron or not? He has a couple of different modeling schemes he plans to use in conjunction working with the University of Illinois to see where that goes. He's not sure yet. He's also very busy, but he recognized early on that this is going to be something that was relevant. So that's the answer I can give you for precipitation. Joe, I don't know if he's going to share any thoughts on temperature when he speaks later, but he's leading up the temperature end of the work. And he has some really interesting ideas for how to do intensity, duration, frequency curves for temperature. Whether he was going to get to the sub-daily scale, I'm just not sure we've even talked about that. But yeah, so we know it's hanging out there and we'll try to tune it as we go.
Hey, Russ. I have a question about regional climate centers. And this is maybe a little bit in the weeds on the engagement, but they have a long history of engaging end users as well as state climatologists. I saw a couple have a role in product development. Is there a more general or really nicely specified role for regional climate centers in general and your end user engagement or this process in general?
I don't know about the engagement. I suspect Mike Brewer has plans for them to help in that respect, but I just haven't talked to him about that particular detail. I did mention a couple of products they're actually actively working on. They might get drug into some more. But another place where they're really making a dent, particularly Western Regional Climate Center, is more in this access space. They manage something called Climate Engine, which exploits Google Earth Engine, which is a way for doing these calculations on very large data sets very efficiently. And they'll be doing some of that work, which goes under the hood behind some of the websites that we lay on top of them. So I know that that'll be a role. I don't know if Joe, if you have something to bring to the table on that, or.
I do. I actually attended the annual meeting of the American Association of State Climatologists 2 weeks ago and awarded a couple $1 million worth of grants to the RCCs and the state climatologists. They went through a internal proposal process, and it was about looking at the things that we develop for engineering, for insurance, and for retail, and how it can be impact local states and regions from an equity lens. So it's not just about that we're trying to support the sectors, but we're also trying to keep in mind the equity strategic goal. And all the things that we're trying to do with each of these sectors is also to see, well, how would ASHRAE use this? Or how would other components of society use this for benefit, not just these 3 demonstration sectors and proxies that we've chosen. So that's part of their role, is to see how is this impacting their community, the things that we're developing as part of IPG. Thanks.
Russ, thank you so much for sharing this wonderful initiative with us. I see the product development. I see you made a list. I'm so excited to see some tools are in progress already. But I see they are related to different hazards, but these hazards are not dependent of each other. So for example, the sea level rise and plural flooding and rainfall, they are dependent of each other, and also they contribute to the compound flooding. It's natural to develop an individual tool for predicting compound flooding. But what I'm thinking, since some tools have been in progress, whether I want to ask what and they can take advantage of the data from the existing tool to predict the total water level to a certain region. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I mostly understand what you're saying. I think my short answer would be yes. And for those particular examples like pluvial and fluvial flooding in the tropical cyclone rainfall and the snow freezing rain thing, those aren't very far down the road yet. They're still basically kind of, we think these are good places to start. Some of the other bullets on that slide were things that are already well along the way. So it was a bit of a mix. So what I would say is, like, if you get the chance during one of the breakout sessions over the next day or two, drive that point home, because it's a really good point.
I think this was the last. This is the last question. Thank you for all the questions, and thank you, Ross, very much.
Thank you. Oh, I have one more thing to say.
Sure, please.
Again, I just wanted to emphasize that, like, I got to have the fun here and give the talk, but Mike Brewer, again, is the guy who deserves a ton of credit for mapping out this program. It's hard to say enough good things about him. I hope you get to meet him someday. He's a super nice guy, but yeah, he's really done the lion's share of this work.